Evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Premier Pundits podcast. Glad to be here. Almost a very, very, very disappointing game week 8, which we'll touch upon in greater detail throughout the show. Anyway, with no further ado, my esteemed co-host, who is smiling, and it is his birthday on Tuesday, so 21 again, Mr. McKenna in the house. How are you doing, my friend?
You know what? I'm not too bad, as you said there. It's birthday eve, so always a kind of positive time, bubbling under the surface. Looking forward to chowing out on some lovely food because I eat quite a healthy diet normally day to day because I'm quite a gym person. I like to pretend that I'm an athlete, but I'm not at all. But at least if I pretend to eat like an athlete, I'm 50% there, aren't I, Ben? But in terms of
until you make it.
Exactly, my man. That's the mind frame. But in terms of it as well, it's not a bad FPL week. It's not one of the best ones. I mean, I can start off with my team. I did get a green arrow, which I said was absolutely fine. So I've moved up from 218,000 to 188,000, which, you know, is fine. 71 points of the game week. I did take a -4 hit to get out Ings, get in Calvert-Lewin and DS as well for Cody. I just think over the long term, it's a no-brainer. Having a set and forget kind of Manchester City defender is good. But the player that I'm so pissed off with, Ben, is Heung-min Son. I took him out 2 weeks ago for a 2-week gamble because basically everybody, every dog, every person and their mother had him in their team. And I was getting lower game week ranks just because of that one single player or not captaining Kane. So I thought, you know what? I'll play it safe, play it easy, get Son in, get Watkins out, and I'll be fine. Well,
you got rid of Watkins?
Yes, indeed.
Oh, that is a disappointment, my friend. You've been eulogising over Watkins, and after particularly after your comments on Thursday night show, when we were talking about the Callum Wilson or the Ollie Watkins, and you went, no, look, I'm firmly behind Ollie Watkins. I thought, well, you know, he was nailed.
Well, the thing is, I got him out 2 weeks ago just because of Son, and I thought, well, logically, Son is going to do better than Watkins. 2 better games, much better XG, teams better, all this kind of stuff. I thought for a 2-week punt, you know what, though? I'll be getting Watkins straight back in. For the reasons that you stated there, I wax lyrical about him. And really, you know, it's my own undoing there. I kind of second-guessed myself. Watkins was doing fine, performing fine, getting some fairly good data. And then this game week, he came to bite me back in the arse. And has put there in the comment there. Sorry, Anna, I think. Is it Anna ND? Thank you very much.
Anand. Is it Anand? I mean, Anand, even to Anand and Pedro, thanks for joining us. Anand, we don't want to be given any credit to Jason whatsoever for the Watkins call. Have you not seen this before? No, I'm sorry. We'll skate over that.
You'll be nicely rubbing it in throughout when we discuss about good players, Wilson versus the others. You'll nicely remind me that, Watkins is looking good, but you took him out. And a good afternoon to you as well there, Madeline. It's great to have everybody on this. And we got a lot of talking points here. We will be doing a second kind of broadcast as well, obviously towards the end of international game week, because obviously there'll be injuries, there'll be all sorts of news. People might get COVID, God forbid, you know, all this sort of stuff that we got to keep up with. But Ben, let's move it on to your team quickly before we get into discussions. How was your game week? Any positives? You know, at least you can revel in my Watkins problems. I can see from your face you're not looking too happy.
Very, very, very disappointed. I thought things were going okay after Saturday, to be honest. I was on 35 points, a nice green arrow across all of my leagues. I broke into the top million. I think I was up to the dizzy heights of around about 800,000, give or take. So heading into Sunday, I was fairly confident, had some involved. And yeah, the concern was the Tottenham at the Hawthorns. I know there's a lot of captaineers of the Kane and the Son variety. I do own Kane, but obviously, you know that I'm just captain in Rashford for the moment. So I thought if those two either banged, really, that would hurt quite a lot. So, after even 1-0, where Harry Kane nicking one, heading toward in the 80th minute, I felt quite fairly happy and comfortable with that. I thought, that hasn't affected me overall rank too much. And I went into the last game with Aubameyang and Leno. I went Leno over Martinez. I mean, Villa were coming off the back of a 4-3 home defeat by Southampton. I think they got beat 3-0 off Leeds prior to that. So, 7 goals in 2 games. For me, the wheels came off. I was looking at Arsenal, a 1-0 performance at Old Trafford, Aubameyang getting, ending his 4-game streak. And it was as if the stars were aligned. I thought this was it. Mikel Arteta, they're going to really sort of dig in and kick on from that. And it was just typical. I mean, these typicals are replacing expletives here. Arsenal. When I seen, so I didn't actually watch that game. Refuse any pay-per-view games. When I seen, was it Ross Barkley's goal disallowed or John McGinn's goal disallowed for Ross Barkley being offside after what was, a matter of moments, I thought, right, that's it. Looks in. That's the shock and the wake-up call that Arsenal will need. They've had that warning shot. Now it's like, right, well, we'll kick in, because what's the point in going to Old Trafford and beating Manchester United when you can't, get a result against what would have been if Aston Villa side, who are, yes, they've had a great start, but given recent performances or given certainly recent results, confidence would have been fragile. That first goal would have been key, and if Arsenal had have got that, you would have thought, well, heads are down. Villa would have been thinking, well, is this another 3 or 4 goals that we're going to be conceding? And it just never happened. And I just watched those Villa goals go in, and every one was just like a stake in the heart. I mean, this is what fantasy football does to you. It gets you annoyed, angry, pissed off about things which really you shouldn't care or less about. I mean, I support Newcastle. I mean, Arsenal's got nothing to do. So, as an Arsenal supporter, you'd be pulling your hair out. And to see that, finished on 51 points. I was hugely disappointed. No, sorry, 54. They had the bonus points to kick in. I was hugely disappointed. So I was a point below the average, which resulted in a big fat red arrow.
You say that about the Arsenal game. I actually didn't have high hopes for it. I don't know if I've mentioned it before on here, but I do, on the radio station that I work at, a kind of weekly guess the score, and I predicted Arsenal to lose this. So you get points if you predict who's the right winner or loser or draw or whatever. And I still got points. So there was a silver lining that Grealish got an assist. But the huge stake in my heart was the fact that Matty Target was my first sub. He got 11 points. And there was Arsenal. I said it at the start of the season. We're a bad side, especially going forward. And this defensive kind of narrative that things have improved at the back, I wasn't believing either. And it's kind of come to fruition this weekend. I'm so worried as an Arsenal fan, because obviously Aubameyang signed that long-term contract now. Where is he? Did he sign a contract to disappear off the face of the earth? He has been non-existent. 0.06 XG per game. He's got less XG than I think even Harry Maguire. That there's funny memes about it. This is really, really worrying stuff. And for the team as a whole, tactics need to be changed, different decision making. The fact that Lacazette hasn't looked good through the middle the last few weeks. Why isn't Aubameyang tried through the middle? Why don't we play Willian on one side, Pepe on the other? Just do something different. And this is something that you and I got frustrated about live on stream. Arsenal were just repeating the same sort of problems. And it was the definition of insanity, because they're thinking, all right, let's do the same thing over and over again. And nothing's changing. And Anand has said, feel like Arsenal does well when they try to defend deep like they did against Poole, City in Community Shield and post-lockdown last season. I mean, I think that was coming from necessity in those sort of games, and it paid off. But I think Arsenal are quite lucky in those games as well in many situations. You know, they haven't produced better data really under Arteta, or maybe better data than under Emery, but I wouldn't say top 4, top 6 data ever since Arteta's been in charge. And that's what worries me. And there's games where it's just so stagnant. They've struggled to create chances. And I think the fact that 𝑟𝑒𝑎𝑙𝑙𝑦's out the side is a big problem. Madeline has said, I have 2 free transfers for game week 9. That is very smart. International break, always good to bank a transfer. I'm having in mind 3 transfers for a -4 hit. It's kind of like a mini wildcard in many senses. So TAA, Bowen, Jimenez out for Kufal, Bruno and Watkins. Also our captain, Bruno, for game week 9. I can see that Ben is seething a little bit there because Bruno's like a swear word to him. What do you think? Do you want me to answer first, Ben, or do you want to talk about one of your least favourite FPL assets in Bruno?
Oh, I mean, confidence is on the rise for Bruno. A couple of goals at the weekend, granted, you know, albeit one was a cross. Rashford, me captain. I mean, it was a poor miss, really. He got the assist, but he should have been heading that in. When I initially seen it was awarded to Rashford, I was over the moon. But he was a good 2 to 3 inches away from that ball. Had a lot of discussions regarding a lot of people. You know, Bruno hasn't been great this season, and yet he's projected, if he continues doing what he's doing in terms of his points output, could be heading for, you know, around about 287 points. In a United team that isn't really clicking, certainly as an attacking force, Bruno hasn't been great. You know, then maybe the signs are good. I see the appeal of the West Brom game on paper. Certainly, that looks like a home banker. I still don't think that things have settled completely. I mean, a lot of people would have had the Tottenham result down, which is why the likes of 𝐴𝑤𝑒𝑚𝑒 and Harry Kane were captained so heavily. I think they expected a little bit of a goal fest, particularly when you look at maybe that the Baggies lost Branislav Ivanovic to COVID just, you know, prior to the game. And yeah, they dug in and played well. But, you know, how many times have we said this about promoted teams? You know, they play well for 80, 85 minutes and they get caught with a sucker punch. They don't take the chances. Colin Grant missed the one where, you know, on another day probably would have slotted that home, and you know, the Baggies would have had at least a point or possibly even 3. But you know, I'm not a big one for taking any hits whatsoever, particularly early on in the season. But I do see you know, just for me, if I'm looking at TA, is obviously he's out. We do know we're looking at around about a month, around about 4 weeks for Trent. So he's gone. We've talked about Jimenez, you know, for a good few weeks now. Wolves just do not look like the team of last season, or even the season before. However, I had an interesting conversation today, which we can maybe touch upon that, which offers a different perspective on Wolves, and a fairly interesting one. And if so, then fair play to Nuno. We can touch upon that. And in Bowen, you know, I like Bowen, and I know you like Bowen. And he's a player that I thought would step up in the absence of Antonio. maybe, take that responsibility, carry the Hammers forward. And again, it hasn't really materialized in terms of points output. And that's what it's all about when it comes. You can look at underlying stats, you can talk about how well they're doing, but ultimately, if it doesn't, if those points don't come to fruition, then in terms of a fantasy set, they're dead in the water. It's a nothing. It's pointless.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with the TAA situation. 7.5, you kind of have to shift him out. And again, it's kind of an interesting, almost a fun one that it then asks the question of where you're going to put that money in your fantasy team. Bowen and Jimenez, I think Jimenez not had a really good season so far. And for 8.5, you've got better assets elsewhere, above or below, and Bowen, yeah, I was kind of strong on him, Ben. And you're right, to kind of highlight that. But I was worried as soon as Antonio got injured. The West Ham team were looking so much better. And since he has been injured, they've only racked up 1.27 XG in the 3 games without Antonio. He's obviously a talismanic player. And I think one of the positives was that when Benrahma came on for West Ham, they looked a little bit improved up front. He got 3 touches in the box, but I don't think we're going to see an output from the West Ham attack like we have been seeing in previous weeks till Antonio's back. He is the talisman. He is probably the only player now that I would say you can safely invest in. But again, he might get injured again. He is one of those sporadically injured players, and kind of finding him when he's in form and not injured seems to be almost mystical at the moment. But yeah, I think the West Ham defence is fine to own in, and that brings it on to Kufal. Great owner, I think. Racking up really good data and looking really good against top teams. So I think that is a fine own there. Bruno, I mean, he's a person that kind of vexes me in terms of data. He's only had second most chances created this season, but then looking at the quality of those chances, only 3 of them big. So he's creating a lot of stuff, but is it actually high quality? And so his XA from open play, so that's expected assists, is 1.02. He does have an XGI of 4.55, but you've got to evaluate that this is boosted by penalties. Other attacking data, only 7 shots in the box, only 9 shots on target. So are you buying him in because he's a penalty merchant? Maybe. Manchester United were one of the most foul teams last season, most penalties. But on the flip side, what kind of data is coming from Manchester United to kind of have that belief? And, looking at them, their XG non-penalty is only just above Burnley and below even that of Crystal Palace's so far in these 8 matches. I'm not sure if Manchester United turned the corner. The big discussion's only out the door. So Bruno's the only one that I wouldn't say. And, we started by saying how much I like Watkins and how much I regret it. So no questions on Watkins there. I think that's a great own. But yeah, it's a difficult one with Manchester United. Looking at them, Rashford was all right in the game, but the data for them is not looking good. Anand has rubbed salt into the wounds here, because he's reminded me about Martinez being a former Arsenal player. I mean, I can't believe that we let him go as well. You and I said it at the start of the season, didn't we, Ben? It was just lunacy. He's one of the best goalkeepers in the league at the moment. We've just handed maybe Premier League safety to Aston Villa on a plate. We've also handed them a nice 3-0 victory. And Anand has also apologised for reminding you about the Rashford goal situation there. But he had Bruno as captain. I mean, that is insulting.
Yeah,
right?
that's a big cause. So fair play for that, Anand, because there had been question marks with regards to his form. Even some questioning almost, has Ollie got that Fernandez sort of blindness where he seems to overlook him. He's starting every game, and maybe he shouldn't be. But just touching upon Martinez heading into game week 8, this was a stat that I picked up in my day-to-day work, and I was fairly surprised that no other keeper am I right in thinking he hadn't conceded from shots outside the box, conceded the most goals from shots outside of the box in the Premier League? As a stat man, you would probably be the me if that's right or not. What was?
You have to say the stat again, Ben. So no goalkeepers conceded more from outside the box
than Martinez. Yeah.
I wouldn't. I don't actually know that stat, which is an interesting one. I mean, looking at his saves from outside of the box, Martinez, he has 8 for the season. He's got a positive XG prevented. Maybe long shots are his weak spot, but then again, I would kind of evaluate and say it wouldn't worry me too much because shots from outside the box are normally low chances anyway, you know, in terms of quality. So maybe that's his weak spot. But then if teams kind of pepper his goal from far away, yeah, 1 or 2 might go in, but they're more lucky goals. What would worry me is kind of shots in the box kind of situation there. And Martinez is fine. He's got 15 shots saved in the box. As I said, they're a positive in terms of the XG prevented. He's looking good, and only 9 goals conceded this season. But Aston Villa are looking one of the best defences. You know, I'm loving it. I've got no real qualms or questions over owning any Villa assets at the moment. I think the 3 that you have to look at are obviously Martinez. He's become like a staple in a lot of FPL teams. But then Grealish, fantastic. And Watkins is the other one. I've got Target, but I'm happy with him at the moment. You know, no questions over him. And again, this weekend, he got an assist. He got bonus points. He's looking a great FPL asset. He might be a differential for some people because I think people are looking at other, you know, Aston Villa assets in the ownership. He's only 1.9% owned, whereas somebody like Martinez is you know, a lot better owned. Grealish is highly owned. I think Watkins is going to become highly owned. So in terms of it, data, XG conceded, Villa are looking the real deal for me. One that's really perplexing me and annoying me is Leicester doing Leicester things. You know, this time, I'm sure you remember, Ben, I'm sure, you know, our listeners remember as well, this time last year, the discussion was Leicester are doing well, but they can't keep up because their data doesn't match their output. And they're doing the same again, especially Jamie Vardy. You know, he's on a ridiculous amount of FPL points, goals. And what kind of backs this up is the fact that half of Leicester's XG has come from penalties this season. Their defensive data is about mid-table. Their attacking data is about mid-table if you didn't factor in the penalties. Well, what do we do about a conundrum like Vardy? Because he's just doing what he does. He perplexes us data people. And it's so hard because even in matches, and you've said it yourself, he's an awful watch because he does nothing all game and then he'll spring up and get 2 goals for you.
I think you just need to accept Jamie Vardy is what he is. He can be very streaky. And I think the key and the skill is catching Jamie at that moment. And when he's in form, you need to be jumping on quickly. And, you know, when that dips a little bit, then maybe, you know, he can be a little bit of an expensive paperweight. But what we do know under Brendan Rodgers is Brendan Rodgers is, you know, absolutely loves him first and foremost. So in terms of the love from Brendan, Jamie's feeling that, you know. In terms of his minutes, if fit, if anywhere near fit, will he start? 100% of the time. There's maybe question marks whether he would complete 90 minutes, but almost Jamie Vardy is along the lines of a Sergio Aguero. You know, very rarely do we see Aguero complete 90 minutes, but it doesn't, you know, he doesn't need 90 minutes to get on that score sheet. And we know in a blink of an eye, there's a couple of goals in there. I think in terms of the Leicester setup, they're looking a lot more settled now, and that maybe alleviates some of the pressures on you know, on some of the players within that squad, particularly Vardy. You know, you've got the likes of, I think Tielemans is playing quite well, Maddison. you've got Priat, you've got Perez doing an odd job, when he comes in. You've got Cengiz Unga, who's building his fitness, who's looked really good coming off the bench. You've got Barnes, you've got Iheanacho, who seems to be doing all right in the Europa League when he gets his chance. So I think there's a lot of fluidity within that squad. The burden is eased somewhat on Jamie Vardy, and I think maybe he's possibly sort of reaping some of the benefits of that. My concerns heading into this period was always, can Leicester manage Europa in Premier League? Back-to-back games, 3 games a week in an 8-day period. Well, it shows that, in recent results, without a shadow of a doubt. I mean, I've been really impressed with Fofana. I think he's slotted into that back line, and for a 19-year-old, looks really composed. And he's somebody that I'm actually tempted to possibly bring in. The card on the horizon during the break. I'm trying to detach myself from the emotional. It's still very raw Sunday night. A lot of this is probably driven by Aubameyang in Arsenal. But also there's a couple of injuries in there, one being the Callum Wilson injury. So, if it means that I'm not happy with 2, possibly 3 players within that lineup, then it could be that I go down the route of, unleashing the beast and making some drastic changes.
Ooh. I love that. And just for everybody listening, this will be a really fun wild card, because obviously Ben doesn't have to follow my advice, but I'm going to give him 2 or 3 players for each position that he wants to change, which are blindfolded. This is going to be almost like blind date, but with football players, with some stats. This blind date has this many shots in the box and this XGI. And this was kind of a point to almost prove the psychological element of FPL, that often you look at the name of the player and the name of the team and you think, oh, well, I had Zaha in the past and he spurned me, he's upset me in the past, I won't get him in. Or you look at the team and you go, oh, well, historically they've not been good, but then they might be on fine form this season. This was what I'd call like the OG Vardy and Mahrez effect. When Leicester won the league that season, people refused to get them in for far too long, just because they said, well, it's Leicester, they can't do it. But then their metrics, their data, their fixtures were fine, and people kind of overlooked them. So, that's the point. And also linking it again there to Anand's point of Bruno, 8 goals, 8 assist returns from last 100 minutes, while KDB gave 30 plus returns. Salah gave 29 returns. I agree. This is the weird thing about Bruno. Since making his Premier League debut, no player has scored more FPL points. And this is why it worries me not owning him. But then it annoys me that the only thing is kind of like the eye test, where he's involved so much. And recently that was lacking a little bit. This is why Ben mentioned, a lot of people said, oh, was Ole blindsided by Bruno? But then he's continuing to return here, there, everywhere, left, right, centre. So I'm not sure on Bruno, much like I'm not sure on Vardy. The only thing is kind of like their historical brilliance, and also they're just kind of data defiers in many senses of the word. And the thing about Bruno as well is he's not just the creator, but he's an enabler in many senses in terms of on the football field. I said there he's created 20 chances, but what he likes to do as well is he kind of makes runs or has speculative shots that he then knows that a teammate can then nip behind or get into this space that he's created. And he's a very hard player to mark, much like Kevin De Bruyne. You don't know whether you want to defend close to him, but then that will leave a space for another player behind, or do you want to leave some space, but then he'll have a long shot. He's a very difficult player for a lot of teams. And so that's the other element of Bruno that metrics can't measure. It is almost his difficulty to play against. And just kind of highlighting the teams here, I've written down teams that I like, teams that I don't. Man United were just in my don't like pile, apart from Bruno and maybe Rashford a little bit. But even then, Bruno is probably the best, only viable Man United asset in my eyes. But even then, I just don't like the Man United data until something happens at the club. There's a weird psychology around the club. But Bruno keeps returning, much like Jamie Vardy. And maybe I'll have to bite the bullet and get one or both in because, the ownership of Vardy is skyrocketing. He's now currently at 20.9%. In terms of Vardy, in terms of
22.6.
So these are very highly owned kind of players anyway, and to and ah on them, it's costly unless your other ones return. And at the moment, Raheem Sterling, who is slightly more expensive than Fernandes, is not returning. And we had this discussion a couple of weeks ago. I'm almost blindsided in a positive way of Sterling, that I keep him in, believing that he will return. And his data doesn't match up to 11.5 mil either. So maybe I'll have to bring in Fernandes.
We obviously seeing there's a little bit of a fixture swing in terms of City. I know they have Tottenham just after the break, but after that, they've got some decent looking fixtures. Burnley, Fulham, West Brom, Newcastle, I think 4 of the next 6. Does that give you a little bit of hope? Does that, this is, for me, this is the big issue where you're looking at them fixtures and I'm thinking Aubameyang, for example, would be my kryptonite, as it were. It's, he scores against Manchester United, and I look at the games, I look at a team that's conceded 7-2, and I'm thinking, right, Aubameyang stays because he's going to notch. And then you look ahead, and I'm thinking, well, actually, they're playing Leeds up next. Leeds with an absolutely porous defence at this moment. Then surely Arsenal cannot fail to score. And then, therefore, you're thinking, is it Aubameyang? Or do you just think, right, I tell you what, forget about everything. Just base your decisions on the eye test and the existing data, and not trying to project anything looking forward, because it just muddies the water too much.
It's a super difficult decision there, Ben, because you're spelling out, the kind of form over fixtures debate that kind of rages on in the FPL community. And for me, I think that the historical kind of quality of Manchester City, coupled with 2 home fixtures against Burnley and Fulham in game weeks at 10 and 11, kind of make me want to keep Raheem Sterling. And again, following up, game week 13 is a home fixture against West Brom. These are some of the worst defences in the league, although I'd say that Burnley aren't as bad as they were at the start of the season. That was more of a personnel problem. But, Tottenham have let in 3 goals just recently to West Ham. And I'd say that Man City's attack is better than West Ham's. But that's historical data. Again, this season, West Ham have been better going forward. It's such a hard debate. And it's kind of like the Watkins thing has already burned me this season. And I'm thinking, well, I've held on to Sterling this long, and it's what they call in psychology the sunk cost fallacy. I've held on this long. It would be silly of me to get rid of them now because of all these great fixtures coming up. And it's that trade-off, at a certain point. And this is why I got Son in, because I thought, well, logically, everything is for him and he should continue this. And then he's blanked 2 weeks in a row, the ones that I own him. And he's got a difficult run of fixtures up next. I then have to evaluate, is it worth continuing having him in my side, even though 60% own him? And I don't think I'll have a firm answer till probably later in the international break, purely because it will come up to a lot of consideration, injuries, like you said, with your team, and a lot of other kind of factors into it. But what I would also address here is I'm not opposed to a well thought out hit in terms of points. So you said that you were kind of totally against them, whereas I've 2 weeks in a row taken hits for long-term players. I got in Masuaku and I got in Diaz on 2 hits. Masuaku's already kind of paid off my faith and got me a nice clean sheet this weekend. Diaz, obviously not this week, but I'm looking more long-term with him. You know, those mentioned great fixtures coming up, but also looking at it tactically, Man City look a little bit better at the back recently. And maybe it's a similar problem that Arsenal have, that they're playing more defensive football at a cost to that attack. So, yeah, it's a super hard question. Maybe people say that I'm beating around the bush, but I don't know till a little bit later what I'm going to do with it, because frankly, Sterling is such a good player, but then he's really not justifying that price point. But the fixtures, you know, there's so much debate on. Madeline has said, have you used wildcard already, or will you be using it around game week 15 and 16? I mean, the whole point of what we've said about, you know, wildcards and stuff, I'll start off, you know, neither of us have used our wildcard. Ben said he might use it in the international break. I mean, game week 15 and 16, I try and hold on to my wildcard for as long as possible. So I get what you mean there. In terms of it, though, I set no real date. It's whether I need it or I want to use it is the kind of mentality that I have. You know, if suddenly Son or Sterling or like 5 or 6 of my players, or even 3 or 4 of my players were suddenly ruled out, I'd have to use it. If there was a big shift, a big template kind of emerging that I'm missing out on, I'd have to play it again. So it's a great question, Madeline. And in terms of it, I don't like to set a specific date, but I will try and hold off for using it as long as possible. I didn't use it till game week 16, or the last game week that you could use it in last year. I didn't use it. And then the COVID stuff happened. I still had it. So I had basically 2 wild cards there, which was good fun. But in terms of it, yeah, I like to hold it for as long as possible. Because I like my teams normally. I've set them up for the long term, and the transfers that I do make are not short term ones. You know, I don't try to jump on trends, apart from this one with Heung-min Son. But that was both medium and short term. You know, looking at him, he's been fantastic all season. Watkins, I liked him a lot, but logically, you know, Tottenham were the team in the ascendancy. They were first or second in a lot of the attacking metrics. And so I was giving Son a chance almost to kind of play it safe. And this is something that, you know, you frown upon sometimes with my game style, Ben. I'm a little bit boring, but I just saw that it was costing me points. So what are your thoughts and feelings on wildcards, though, to answer Madeline's question there?
I don't think, you know, I see a lot of discussion around when you should use your wild card, strategies that you should employ to bring in your wild card. For me, it's very individual. It's unique to a specific user, and I always go back to when I'm using any chip, when I'm making any decision, whether it's something as big as a wild card or even just a transfer, I'm always looking to maximize returns. So how am I going to get the biggest bang for me buck? And if, you know, it feels right, or I think it's needed to do a wild card. Look, I've done a wild card either game week 1 or game week 2 in the past, just because, you know, I wasn't happy with, and maybe it was a bit of an emotive decision to do that. But for me, it felt as if it was the best decision at that point in time. Now, like I say, I'm going to leave it a couple of days for me, and I'll reflect in the cold light of day on my team. You know, I'm not going to just pull the trigger because everybody else is, or I think it should be done. You know, if I'm looking at that team and I'm maybe unhappy with 3, 4, 5, 6 players, and yeah, I maybe just want to just freshen things up, then yeah, I'll go down that route. But similarly, look, if it got to the stage where I felt happy and comfortable with my team all the way through, and it meant losing a wild card, then, you know, that so be it. In the current, you know, climate, with COVID, with the number of injuries that we've got. I don't think you're in a position to be able to, to stick, steadfast with a plan throughout the season. I think it needs to be fluid. I think you need to assess game week to game week, have an idea, have an understanding, have an inkling of what you'd like to do, but understand that there are so many uncontrollable, outside influences which could impact on those decisions that, accept that, with the best intentions and with the will in the world, it may be that you have to pull your wild card earlier than 15 or 16, or you get to 15 or 16, you could be coming off the back of, back-to-back triple score game weeks. We just don't know. You see the results, the Tottenhams at the Old Traffords, the Villas against Liverpool's. There's some still Villa at Arsenal at the Emirates. That to me is a big one, really, on paper as well, given where the two teams were coming into that match. So, yeah, look, I think it's very much down to the individual to see where you're at, and if you feel it's best utilised at any given time, regardless of when it is, then go for it.
And a question kind of linked to that then there, Ben, is Anand says, Leeds really struggled without Phillips and Rodrigo. Will they be back post-international break?
The issue with Phillips is we know it's shoulder-related. There's no surgery required, so that's good. Leeds' website jumped on that. An initial time frame was around about 6 weeks. Now, we all know that Marcelo Bielsa is very forthright. He's open and honest at what he says. And he dismissed that timeline straight away. He said, as far as I'm concerned, it's not 6 weeks. It could be slightly less. It could be slightly more. We just don't know. If we were talking about a surgical intervention, then we could be looking at anywhere between maybe 10 and 16 weeks, 2.5 months to 4 months, depending on what the procedure is. And because he hasn't went under the knife, typically 4 to 6 weeks would probably be a good, guesstimation on where we're at, which means that Phillips shouldn't be too far away. What we do know about shoulder injuries inherently, again, and I'm reading between the lines here, he should be able to maintain some decent levels of baseline fitness. He can probably get involved in training sessions fairly early on, which would be non-contact. So it's not like a muscle injury, where you're removed from the group and you can't really do any kind of sprint and this, that, and the other. With the shoulder, it could be that, like I say, he is involved in the training, the data, but it will just be non-contact initially, and that would be stepped up. So in terms of his base level fitness, shouldn't be in too bad a place. And with regards to Rodrigo, I think it was Rodrigo the COVID. That was ahead of, I think he was flagged just ahead of game week 7. So providing everything's fine and he submits, he's retested, and that comes back negative, we would expect him to be training with the group and he would be fine coming into game week 9.
Yeah, the thing with Leeds, though, is I'm saying a big avoid on their assets at the moment. People who've been listening to us consistently will know that we don't like Bamford. I don't like his data. The Leeds data is good in terms of the attack, but defensively he's been really poor. And the problem with a side that's promoted is you often see an output decline by a third. And Bamford's output last season was really poor anyway. I think he's in the form of his life, and he's just doing a Pookie 2.0. Last season in the early stages, during this kind of anarchistic time where anything and everything is happening, Bamford is just doing well. But we're now seeing a more kind of convergence to normal trends in football data. The odd 0-0s, 1-1s, the boring kind of score lines that we're more used to seeing in the Premier League week in, week out. Burnley seeing out a clean sheet is becoming far more the norm than a 7-0 shellacking of like Liverpool. We've seen some crazy fixtures here. And now that things are returning to normal, Leeds will not continue to get these stop outs. And I think the fact that their defence will struggle a lot may impact their ability to score goals. You know, they're creating fantastic chances, but the problem with Leeds is their players just aren't good enough, some of them, for the Premier League. You know, looking at their goalkeeping XG prevented data, Meslier is now competing with Matt Ryan for the worst kind of XG prevented for the season. He's on -4 goals prevented for the season. They've let in 17 goals. This is, I wouldn't say relegation stuff at the moment, but that is kind of near relegation defensive data. The thing that's positive for them is that they've got, you know, top half kind of attacking data. But we've historically seen that teams don't stay up because of good attacks. They stay up because of good defences. Arsenal, I can't remember, I think it was the 94 season, scored the least goals in the Premier League, but finished 10th because of fantastic defence. The team that lets in the most goals has always got relegated every season, whereas the team that scores the least goals doesn't always get relegated. It's not a truism. So the fact that Leeds are one of the worst kind of XG, I think in terms of the XG for them, it's a little bit worrying. I think they might score goals, but they might score them through the team rather than Bamford. Anand has said Bamford took 140 shots last season in the Championship. Imagine if he converts 20 of them this season. Easy to say this, Jason, in my humble opinion, feel like Leeds will attack. I mean, we've seen it so far. Leeds will attack and they do get returned, but Bamford has always underperformed his data. And at the moment, it's ridiculous, his returns. He might get 20 goals in the season. I doubt it, because I just don't see his quality being there, especially now that defences have improved quite a bit. I'm just very kind of wary of him as an FPL asset. We see this with promoted strikers. None have hit over 15 goals ever
for me,
in the Premier League season.
In Leeds, this is, look, I've heard a lot about Marcelo Bielsa, the fact of you know, he's so highly thought of as a coach and what he's done at Leeds. Now, for me, this is where Bielsa needs to earn his corn. This is, to me, looking at that Leeds side and thinking, right, this is the way I want to play, but these players aren't good enough to play in this system. We've lost 2 games back-to-back, conceded 8 goals, scored twice, 4-1 and 4-1. We can't continue to carry on and play like this, because otherwise we will go down. So for me, Bielsa will have to reevaluate and potentially tweak his system, and that could have a domino effect on Bamford, because we talk about this insanity. You're doing the same old thing. Is it 18 goals now? Leeds have conceded, I think it is. Is it 18 goals? I'll just double check that. 17 goals. So they're up there with West Brom in terms of the number of goals that they've actually conceded. And how long can you expect Bamford to be, exceeding his XG output in delivering? He seems to be the only bright spark, really, of that team in terms of an FPL asset. Nobody else is really doing a great deal. And for me, this is a moment for Bielsa. I think he's really got to, they've got Arsenal next, then they're aware at Goodison, who I know have hit a sticky patch, but then you've got Chelsea. Chelsea are really on fire at the moment, looking really good. Then you've got West Ham, a little bit of a Jekyll and Hyde team, and then Newcastle, Manchester United. So, the game against Newcastle certainly isn't a gimme. They're not far from us. They're only an hour and a half down the road, so there's going to be a little bit of needle in that one. Both teams will be fired up. It's not exactly a local derby, but we're not too far, so we will be pumped. There's a lot of history between the two teams, and I think this next little break heading towards that festive, fixture program is going to be massive, because we're heading into Christmas, and we all know what happens in and around Christmas in terms of the number of injuries. And we know that Bielsa isn't carrying a very big squad. And it's all well and good. Players can play in 2 and 3 positions, but there's playing in 2 and 3 positions and getting by. And there's, having players in position who are capable of performing at the highest level in the Premier League against some of the best teams and best players in the world, which, I think maybe is how they've become a little bit exposed. We've seen just the loss of what Calvin Phillips has done. So I think it's slightly worrying times down at Ellen Road.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Ben. And I did actually give an incorrect stat there. No promoted striker scored more than 21 goals, but that was Andy Johnson, who had loads of penalties that season.
Surely Andy Cole, when he came up for the entertainers. Because I think he scored.
I can have a look at that. So
I think, but obviously that doesn't. I'm not sure how many of those were Premier League goals.
Yeah. So Andy
34.
Cole had 34 in 93-94 Premier League season. So yeah, he was, but that's more of a rarity story. More often than not, players don't kind of adapt to the Premier League. Ones in recent memory that have done well that I've got here is Odion Ighalo, Charlie Austin, Darren Bent, Yakubu. But it's more often not that they don't do too well. And Bamford himself, last season, you said 140 shots in the Championship. He had 44 big chances. He missed 34 of them, only scored 16 goals. So I don't think Leeds will create as many chances because they're coming up against better defences. And as you said here, there might be a shift now in terms of actual kind of play style, a little bit towards defending and seeing out games. They've done well against bigger sides, but as I said there, I think he's just kind of capitalised on the situation we're seeing now. Madeline has asked, what do you think about Kilman? He will/is ready to take Saitz's place. I mean, I advised against this last week. If you're going to own a defensive asset from Wolves, just get Cody. Remove the worry. He's going to start in, week out. Kilman is an interesting asset. He might keep his place, but for me, in terms of playing for Fantasy Premier League, I look at players who are nailed, who are going to start week in, week out. I don't want to be kind of coming up to an hour before the match, frantically refreshing and then going, oh crap, my player's not started because I wanted, a cheap differential. And in terms of it, Kilman has probably been a great asset for a few weeks here. I don't know if he'll keep his place because he's doing a fantastic job, and it might be his place to lose now to size. But I just don't like that element of risk when I'm picking a team. I want at least an 11, but I like players on my bench as well that are going to play, that will pick up appearance points if there's a freak injury or just something happens in a warm-up or something that we're not told about before deadline. And so Kilman, for me, size, I would just remove that element of doubt from my team. Is that something that you buy into, Ben, as well?
And maybe over the last couple of game weeks, I think we all initially assumed it was size or Kilman, one or the other. I almost think that Kilman is locked in there, and Sias is considered a left wing back. And his competition is coming from Morcal and Ait-Nouri. So I see that three-way competition for that left wing back spot. Now we know, Kilman has been doing very well. He's been delivering, and I thought it was a very interesting choice of words from Nuno when talking about Kilman. They were saying that there was questions of, would he continue in the team, and as opposed to almost it was a backhanded compliment in a way. as long as he keeps on playing, he'll keep his place. It wasn't what he's been doing a great job for. He's come into the team. It's been seamless. He's really shone, defended excellently in that back three alongside Bowley and Coney. It was like, no, he needs to keep on delivering if he wants to keep his shirt. Now, you get to know individuals from working with these players on a daily basis, and so as good managers do and motivators, they will know how players respond to maybe certain actions, certain words, and some players prefer to be kept on their toes. They respond better to that. You have others who maybe just need the arm around the shoulder, and that need that little bit of loving and that little bit of reassurance. So it could be that Nuno is, like I say, doesn't want Kilman to get complacent, maybe carried away because he's just come in and he has done well and it's been picked up by the media. And Nuno's maybe just tempering that a little bit because he wants to keep his feet grounded. I mean, from what I've observed and from what I understand, he's a very level-headed guy anyway. And he's worked really hard. I think he's done it the hard way. So he knows what it's like to mix it. And for me, I don't think he's like. There's nothing at this moment in time that would indicate to me that he's potentially at risk of maybe losing his place. I think as a back three, I think Nuno likes that more conservative, passive approach where I tell you what, we'll just have three defenders that really do nothing other than defend. We've got another 7 players ahead of them potentially. Semedo, maybe Dinnery, and then you're attacking 3 with Dendonga or Neves or Moutinho, maybe Holden, and they can start creating and they can do the magic. Let's just sit in there with 3. If you're dropping Sias in there, he gives a little bit more of an attacking outlet, as it were, and maybe Wolves don't want to overexpose themselves during these early weeks, which feeds in nicely. It's a nice segue into a conversation that I had with a journalist today with regards to. Now, we talked about the very hot topic, and I apologise, I am going slightly off topic here, but I'll try to be as quick as I can. It's the 3 subs versus the 5 subs rule. And one of those things that we touched upon was how Wolves have got this exemplary injury record. Heading into game week 7, to give you some kind of indication of where we're at, Wolves had suffered 2 time loss injuries all season. That's it. Now, teams like Manchester City and Liverpool, I think they've suffered 6 times more time loss injuries during that period than actually Wolves have. And the conversation then moved on to, well, actually how Liverpool played yesterday against Manchester City, all guns blazing, and we obviously seen Alexander-Arnold limp off. And the conversation went back to Wolves and almost this paradigm shift. Now, we know we've lost Matt Doherty, and we know we have players like Semedo coming in, Neto establishing himself in the team, and on the opposite flank we have Aït-Nouri. So there is that bedding in period. But we've also seen the likes of maybe Traore, who's dropped out of the, certainly out of contention really for a starting berth. And is it almost as if, and very clever if so, is it almost Nuno saying, well, look, we're coming off the back of a heavily disrupted pre-season. The risk of injury incidents for our players is so much greater than it ever has been. So I tell you what, instead of going out there, at 100 miles an hour, what you get with your Dohertys and your Traores and your bombing forward up and down the wing, let's adopt this more conservative approach. We'll sort of grind results out. Mightn't be as nice on the eye. We mightn't get the results that we necessarily want, but what we will have is we'll ensure that we're minimizing the risk, and we're going to keep a fairly fit and healthy squad. So down the line, heading into these other busy fixture periods when other teams are picking up a lot of injuries, then Wolves, can hopefully boast a clean bill of health.
That's a really, truly fascinating insight into what may be the reasoning behind an adapted approach. You know, there is a clear difference in the tactical style, and maybe that is it. And also, would coming into the thinking of Nuno Espirito Santo, second half of the season, Christmas period as well included in this, would he be thinking that maybe by playing more conservative football, he can have a great run to the end of the season?
Yeah. I mean,
Is that
exactly
something
that.
maybe
You know,
Nuno's
what we're
thinking?
talking about is managing the load of players, and what you don't want on the back of is, you know, this unprecedented pre-season that we didn't really have, is you don't want obviously players to be playing week in and week out in almost that red zone, that zone where players are at risk of picking up injuries. And by, like I say, just playing that little bit of conservative. I mean, to give you a bit of a, I suppose, insight in terms of distance covered, this is not about distance covered. Almost in the last 5 to 6 years, people go, this player's ran 12 kilometers and this player's ran 13. Yeah, that hasn't really changed in all of the seasons. So it doesn't matter, you know, it's always there or thereabout. What has changed, and this is the big one, this is really what impacts a lot in terms of injuries. It's the number of high intensity runs that players are asked to undertake with either minimal, little or no rest at all. So it's, you know, your Traore's of this world who are maybe, you know, asked to run 70, 80 yards at 70, 80, 90% maximal speed, and then they're required to do that again with, you know, little or no rest involved. And them are the problems that cause the muscular injuries, where you're putting extreme load, you know, on the body. And, you know, by us almost taking that out of the equation, you're almost, you know, protecting your squad with, like I say, with one eye on the long-term game. And it, you know, and we're reading between the lines here. Of course we are, because we'll never really fully, truly know what happens between, you know, behind the scenes. But it does make a lot of sense, and it would be very, very shrewd, you know, if that was the case, if it was a conscious decision to protect these players and his squad heading into the new campaign, you know, then that would be, because he is a very, very switched on guy, Nuno, and his backroom staff, as demonstrated, you know, from everyone from recruitment to coaching to the sports science team. They are meticulous and they know their job, and they're very, very good at it.
Yeah, and the consistent lack of injuries at the club as well is testament to this belief system. One other player that I wanted to ask about in terms of specifically for injuries is actually Ben Chilwell. Now, my worry, he is one of the biggest owned assets now in Fantasy Premier League. He's looking near that T-word template essential in team, 6 million now. And I didn't own him this week. I'm looking at him as a great asset with some good fixtures coming up. Chelsea look much improved defensively as well. I think they passed my litmus test in terms of it. But historically, he's missed out on 200 or nearly 200 games of football since 2016 with foot, ankle injuries. And I remember last season, if I'm right, he missed out, was it 60 days from an ankle injury? Is this something that you'd be worried about, especially in the context of this season, Ben? Or will he be able to get over that?
Injuries Info has just joined us, probably at a rather apt time. So, you know, if he's interested in injuries, then he has joined the stream at a good opportunity. I'm presuming, did you pick that up off Transfer Market? Is that where you got that injury data from? Yeah. So yeah, I mean, the guys across there do a great job, but it's fairly generic, the reporting, in terms of it. It's not an actual ankle or foot injury per se. It's plantar fasciitis. So it's not like it's an impact injury or anything like that. And plantar fasciitis is an overuse injury. And it's notoriously difficult to control in some cases. You know, worst case scenario, it may require a surgical intervention. In recent seasons, we've seen the likes of maybe Jordan Henderson is probably one of the most high-profile players that are known to have suffered from it. What it really means is his load needs to be managed. So what we've seen at that time was players could play game week to game week, Saturday to Saturday, but they may struggle to play Saturday, Wednesday, and Saturday. So that would be the concern. And the issue is it's something that's underlying. It's something which can flare up on occasion. So just because a player is able to maintain levels of fitness and be involved in those games, for weeks, possibly months, that's not to say that continues. So there's always a slight concern there with regards to Ben Chilwell that it could actually flare up again. It'll be interesting to see what happens during this international break and how Gareth Southgate and his team manage Ben Chilwell, because how medical teams from national team work differently to players domestically can be huge as well. Although I know Chelsea do have some influence, within the backroom staff as well. So I don't think England are as bad. But when you look at maybe other national teams, if they're going away, then that would be more of a concern. But yeah, look, I'm a Chilwell owner. I got him before he became template, and yeah.
Oh, yeah, you're the template buster, mate. You get them pre-template Kane as well.
He's becoming a very, very hard man to ignore. Even if Chelsea aren't getting, the defensive returns, he's such a threat going forward. And we've seen from Saturday's game, even when he doesn't connect, he's jumping in with a goal and it's banging off his hip. And yeah, I think I've had him in 4 or 5 weeks, and I think I've been fortunate enough that he's more or less returned in every single one. So he's been one of me bright lights during these last few weeks.
Yeah, he's a great one, and I think he'll be one that I'm considering bringing into my team. There's a lot of considerations, and I think this is the problem at the moment. There's a lot of great assets to kind of mull over and discuss, and this is something that we'll bring out with our next show a little bit later in the international game week when we know who is injured and who isn't. But before we head into the final comments, are there any other players or teams that you want to highlight then before we end?
There's a lot can change between now and game week 9. I'm sweet on Chelsea at the moment. I think they, particularly attacking wise, definitely 100% on my radar is 𝐴𝑤𝑒𝑒𝐷. If I've pronounced that right, I may have murdered that surname. But after his 2 wayward passes on Saturday, where it looked as if he was, part of the dog and parrot team, he then just sort of stepped up his game and wow, I was going to say left foot, but I've seen him ping one with his right as well. I can't remember who it hit, but it nearly put him into the stand. I mean, he connected, and what an absolute wonder. I mean, that ball for Chilwell, the one for Werner, that Werner sort of put wide, was a great pass. And he's won. His ownership is still hovering around 11%, so he fits the Ben Dinnery template. I wouldn't expect that ownership to hang around that level for too long. Like I say, certainly off the back, I think he created 6 big chances or 6 chances. I'm not sure if it was big chances, but it was basically the most created by a single player in any game this season so far. And yeah, he looked as if he could just sort of turn it on at any point. He looked a great player for me. So he's one most definitely on my radar.
And who would he be looking to replace in your team as well?
Aubameyang is the slippery slope. He is there. I mean, I've got a lot of money invested in him. If it was, if he was in and around that 8-9 million mark, then he may be one that I could persevere with. But given I've got so much tied up in that, it's just, you cannot really afford to carry, players of that ilk, of that cost for too many game weeks, because when there are other options elsewhere. I mean, I'm not that happy. I think I could definitely do with strengthening someone in my back line, maybe an upgrade. I can maybe upgrade in midfield, although I had Souček on the bench at the weekend. That one hurt. So maybe he's a little bit reluctant to get rid, but I can certainly improve. Wilson would be the one, there's some suggestion at this moment in time, and we're waiting for the results of the scan, that he could be out way past the international break. So again, maybe in and around that 4 to 6 week mark. If that's the case, I could be looking. I could do an Aubameyang to Ziyech and then a Wilson to investor. I mean, I don't know if I'll be able to stretch as far as a Vardy, maybe, but I can certainly, look to boost that front line.
I think that would cover it, because there's a 4 or nearly 4 mil difference between Ziyech and Aubameyang, and then the 4 million would hopefully nicely cover a Wilson move. That could be a very fun one. I mean, in terms of it as well, there's one to consider at Chelsea. Abraham, 2.2% ownership, 4 games under his belt now, 2 goals, 2 assists. He's an interesting one. I think he's very maverick. Maybe
I'm not a fan. I must admit.
But in terms, no, he's a bit of a worry for me as well. And I'd say as well, just the final word to people: Everton are still doing all right. They've lost 3 games in a row now, but they've got good fixtures on the horizon. And I think a lot of people, are worrying a little bit too much, because after the international break, again, we will address this, closer to the time, but hopefully their best starting 11 will be fit. So 𝑟𝑒𝑎𝑙𝑙𝑦 will be back in there. Digne, all those players that be missing over this game week period where they've struggled to win games, well, they'll be back. So I think that's a positive there. And then Anand has said Zaha's fixtures are decent over the next 3 game weeks, as per FPL FDR. Plays Burnley, West Brom, and Newcastle. Is that a hold? And how about replacing Wilson with Martial? He's somebody that you liked. In terms of it, Zaha, he's looked improved this season, and I like a slightly different Crystal Palace kind of shape. Eze is doing bits in terms of creativity. They're playing a little bit more off the leash, but then, looking at the team shots, XG non-penalty, they're still down there. 6 expected non-penalty goals, 8 in terms of actual expected goals. There's not a lot of shots inside the box. Big chances created. I don't know. Crystal Palace are playing a lot on the counter-attack. 12 big chances is actually quite a decent one. As top half of the table stuff. I just worry about the history of them. And they look good on paper, but Burnley have looked improved defensively. Newcastle have let in the least big chances so far this season of any team. And West Brom, it'll be kind of a slugfest. They held Tottenham, who is a much better attack, to a very kind of solid 1-0. It could have gone 0-0. I'd be worried about those fixtures, if in all honesty. He's all right to hold for those, but I wouldn't get him in for it, because I'm very skeptical about improvements with Crystal Palace. They've done well in some good fixtures against teams that aren't good teams, whereas against other teams, I don't know. These are kind of flattering to deceive games. He did well against Leeds, Fulham, and Manchester United, but are these teams that we're too worried about this season? Obviously, Man United, the players are good, but they haven't been great this season. They got destroyed 3-1 at home against Crystal Palace. I've worries there. And Wilson with Martial, it's a big risk, because Man United aren't playing well at the moment, and he's much more expensive. I just look at other players around that price point. Watkins, even Che Adams. Che Adams is part of a Southampton team that are really creating good chances, playing well as a team. Calvert-Lewin, all those kind of players there, I'm much more kind of inclined to bring in because they got good teams and good individual data. Whereas Martial, he's been out for a while. Man United haven't looked good, but then he might be the spark to bring positivity to the team. I don't know. What do you think, Ben, on those two kind of discussion points there?
He's almost along the lines of a Callum Wilson for me. I'm not really sold on the team. I say the way Roy Hodgson / Steve Bruce set them up, but almost, he's nailed for a start. And if they're going to score goals, then it's going to go through a Wilson or a Zaha. The Eze performance at the weekend was really interesting. I'd like to see him, if he can repeat that going forward. It gives Palace another little attacking outlet. And Zaha may flourish under that. We've seen a first goal of the season for Ayew as well. So yeah, look, I like Zaha. The Martial punt, and it is a punt, to be honest. He's coming off the back of a 3-game suspension. Didn't do anything of note really at the weekend. And he's another player who is very streaky, hot and cold. You never get a 7 out of 10 out of Martial for me. It's either a 5, 5.5, or a 9 or a 9.5 when he's really in the mood. And he's a lot of money for what he is. And I totally agree with you. I think there are better options elsewhere who are slightly cheaper. And I think that's probably, where I'm sitting with that. Although, heading into game week 8, Martial was one that I was going to consider that maverick move, but it would have been a punt more than anything else. There's just nothing that really backs up, any decision to bring him in. Hang fire a little bit with Callum Wilson. I mean, we don't know 100% how bad this hamstring injury is. We can only hope for the best. We're in no rush. So, if it transpires that, it's going to keep him out maybe until December, then you can sort of reevaluate. When we talked before about national teams and medical supports, France are the ones that are definitely on my watch list and risky for players. So, yeah. So, I'm fairly good authority that, in terms of not that these players are not competent and the backroom staff, but there's an understanding these days that, long gone are the times when everybody's just clumped together and you all do the same thing. And now a lot of players are working on individualized programs. You have different post-match recovery strategies for different players. There may be targeted recovery based on maybe niggles or injuries that they're carrying. And I've been told that when it comes to France, they're not really bothered about. They're maybe a little bit blasé or a little bit, full of their own self-importance, dare I say, So, the risk of picking up injuries on international duty is very, very real. And I certainly wouldn't be looking to pull the trigger on any transfers until, maybe after those internationals are done and dusted. And at least that those players are going to be fit and healthy and available.
Yeah, this is the whole point. And I can't remember who said that they'd saved transfer. But yes, so Madeline said it. 2 free transfers for game week 9. It's almost like a leg up because then they're suggesting 3 transfers, mini wildcard. Hold on to your transfers as long as possible during this period because anything and everything happens on these international breaks, especially at the moment with COVID, all these sorts of problems. So holding on as long as possible. I know price rises are irritating and trying to get it, but the biggest price drop or price loss to you is you've spent your 2-3 transfers or you've taken a -4 hit and then the player doesn't play for 1 week or more because they've picked up a silly injury, and then you're kind of stuck with them. And if you don't have your wild card, then you're even more stuck. During this period, it is so important just to keep and hang fire on top of it. You know, sometimes doing nothing is the best thing, and I learned that the hard way this week with Watkins and the Sun transfer. But it goes for any sort of transfers. The longer you can sit on it, think on it, mull it over, is probably going to come out more positively, because then it will be less emotional and it'll be more well thought out. So that's my kind of final summarizing point there, Ben. Anything that you want to add before, you know, we head off here into the international break, and then we'll be back very soon to give you a roundup of all that and some more in-depth data and analysis to help you with your game week 9
tonight,
teams.
Jay. Another really good podcast. Some excellent questions, good engagement. Great to see so many people in the chat box. This is what it's all about. This is what we love doing. Yeah, so enjoy a little bit of time, reflect on the team, and yeah, just have a little bit of a walk away, and then you come back fully refreshed as we head towards game week 9. We will be back, so we will have at least another 2 live shows ahead of game week 9. One of them could involve a wild card. We will see. I will let the dust settle, and then we'll obviously hold our pre-game week 9 chat, where we look at, you know, identifying some of those key contests, key matchups, and have a look at some of the data where hopefully, like I say, we won't pick up too many injuries during the break. But yeah, so thanks again for joining us. It's been great. Really enjoyed it. But it's a goodbye from me until the next time.
And it's a goodbye and a good luck from me as well.